Okay, hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Joint Flows. Today we are joined by Freddie Banks. Freddie, how are you?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Tesh. Really good. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Good. So Freddie is an account executive over at Jiminny, a great tool that you should probably check out if you haven't done so already. Do you want to paint a little bit of color into who you are for our listeners? Talk about who you are, how you got to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, joined, well, basically, first of all, sort of 27 years old. Like Hitesh said, working as account executive. Started very much from the ground up, knowing nothing about what I wanted to do, as I'm sure many people don't. Started in an initial sales role, which was sort of $150 a day. Couldn't do that. So I moved into something I liked, which was like data analytics a little bit. Again, 3 months after, I couldn't do that. So much like the typical salesman, moved. And then finally, luckily landed myself in a Savills estate agency role, but very much customer facing, sort of sales centric. Now, it was really good. Loved it, kind of speaking to clients directly, loved selling on the phone as well. But I had this thought process of being like I need to work in technology. I don't know what it was, something clicked. Spoken to a few family members and led to a couple of conversations with some recruitment teams. Worked for a year in a fantastic company, which was construction tech focused. And then again, I took a final step back and resonated with I didn't quite like global and I wanted to be a bit more startup. So stumbled across Jiminny, been here for a year and a half. And it really has been the best, experience for me personally so far.
Amazing. And it's interesting you say that your preference was more startup, obviously based on your experiences before Jiminny. It wasn't very startup orientated, if I'm not wrong. Mick and myself are very similar to that. We prefer a startup environment. What is it about that startup environment that appeals to you?
Yeah, I think there was just a couple of things. What I noticed from the kind of exchange from when I was in a state agency to that construction tech firm, that was kind of the first step, both quite global. But it was very much micromanagement at its strongest point. I was very much being looked at everything I did. Even when I hit the number, you still got to continue, which of course I loved, but it was very much always getting emailed, push further. And it taught me a lot, right? It made me I'm sure, a better salesman in the long term. But I realized it wasn't quite for me. I felt uncomfortable. I didn't want to sometimes come to work. So moving to that sort of slightly less of a size, but still a global company, I just kind of started to had the similar situation a little bit. Micromanagement was still there. But I really liked the areas of autonomy, starting to get more transparency over the different roles within the business, starting to work alongside, customer success teams, for example, starting to work with, leadership teams a lot more closely, starting to basically design my own process in many ways within this big business. But that's what I really loved. And I probably wasn't quite getting my ideas quite put across, what I wanted to do for the team. And then when I came into Jiminny, that was almost a complete different environment, just because that startup feel, you basically have full scope of speaking to everyone within every team. You get a wider knowledge base. And I think knowledge is such power, knowing what every single role does within the business, helps you not only sell to people, right? Because you know how the whole platform works and how the team works, but also it just means you have a very good relationship with the whole team. I think that's really essential.
Yeah. And Freddie, you get to experience probably the best leadership in SaaS in the UK and maybe in Europe with the Laveries. What is it like to work with such talented and gifted and they literally care about people? I think the team they've built around them is just incredible. What is it like working closely with them?
Amazing. I think they both provide such they're so different in so many ways in the way that they help the team, but they're so similar with their overarching goal to really make, Jiminny the best it can be, right? Shelley's really got that friendly, I guess, quite focused feel to her. She very much has structure around how she's going to build Jiminny and what she's done, in the past. I think what I need to touch on is Tom and Shelley have dealt with it from the ground up. They haven't sort of stumbled across the idea, built it out, and it suddenly imploded to be this fantastic product. It's really they've come from the bottom of sales. They come from an SDR. They've gone to the account executive. They've both been VPs at, Reward Gateway. And with that in mind, you can really feel the pain. You can tell that they feel the pains that you're going through. Having that transparency and leadership is so essential because they can understand when sometimes you're off. They can really resonate when you're struggling with certain areas of business, and their ultimate goal is to try and make you like them rather than you're an employee as part of like a clog in the wheel. So that's why I love working with them, is because Tom's really this kind of bit more flamboyant, really loves to sell, loves to speak about Jiminny, and then you kind of got the structure and focus around Shelly. Not to say she's not lovely, which she is, but she's very much the structured and focused side of the business to keep us on, the path that we need to be.
Yeah, I love that. That's very much all my best managers always told me, you don't work for me, I work for you. And so that's there's a bit of that going on there, which is great as well. So let's talk a little bit about the obvious elephant in the room, which is the change of the sales environment at the moment as well. It's a lot more competitive. How are you finding that at the moment? Like what kind of insights can you share in terms of what your experiences are currently?
Yeah, absolutely. So like my current, from my experience of speaking to many companies, we very much deal with, to paint a picture, is kind of like SaaS software, sales for sales environment. And look, we're seeing multiple, I guess, close rates changing. If you're looking at percentages, opportunity creation falling slightly, market funnel, marketing teams really having to shift their focus on what they, need to do. And then from my own personal experiences, deal cycles are taking longer, right? And fundamentally, they've changed. How many stakeholders you need to get on board, who you're talking to. And I think a massive piece that I've really tried to work on recently is consultative and value-led approach to speaking with clients. I think it was so easy for me, not just Jiminny, but every business is out there. It was so easy for a company to come to you. You sell them the product, they're sold on it because they've already come in with the idea that they want to buy your platform. Now it's a lot more like companies reaching out to multiple, different competitors. The environment's a lot stronger, and you're really having to position the platform, your product, in a way that's going to benefit them. And if it doesn't, you have to be very much less assertive as you used to be, because I think they naturally will then be swayed away.
And so I've bought from Freddie. It's no news now. I was really impressed by the sales process, but I felt like you were trying to help me personally get to a specific goal, and that goal was different 6 months ago than it was today, and Jiminny is still relevant, so that there's no problem with renewing here. But what's your typical mindset when you go and speak to these clients? How do you create such strong relationships to start with?
Yeah, I think it was something that I really wanted to touch on today, was like, knowledge is power. And I mean that in the best of ways of being product, but also the person you're going to speak to and the company you're going to speak to. Now, that means prep. Like, you need to know your product inside out. Like, I think with the market as it is, if you do work in an environment where you're getting a load of inbounds every day, great. You're probably really busy, so you don't have as much time. But, in the startup, smaller companies, time is now becoming a little bit more available. So how do you make use of that time? And I like to speak to our engineers and get full updates on, where's the product going? Have we got a timeline on this? Understanding, what Tom's got in mind for any like long-term ideas. So you can really come to the meeting prepared for anything that the customer says. And then when you're actually in that meeting, knowing who that persona is, going through their LinkedIn, scrounging any bit of information you can get from their posts, what they're saying about their own company, the company itself, looking at insights, like all that knowledge is such power to build that initial relationship. I think now more than ever, like I kind of touched on, like the competitive environment's growing quite a lot. And it's how much do you know about, not only that person, but like what do they need? What have they been posting about? Like, are they growing as a business? I think coming into a meeting like that is always going to benefit you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like a lot of what you're speaking about there is the preparation that you're doing in the build up to that meeting as well. I'm a strong believer, and you probably heard it in other episodes of the podcast, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. And so what kind of tips can you give to our listeners about the kind of preparation that you have? What kind of knowledge do you need going into that meeting?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few ways that I look into it. There's obviously the LinkedIn is kind of where I start fundamentally. Like, I like to use profiles. And like I said, like, it's not only looking at their posts, but what are they commenting on? What are they liking? Do you have shared interests? I think my relationships that have been best built with my clients is shared interests. And that's where I kind of start. So do I have anything in common? Do I have anything to relate to them? Like, do they travel? Do they play sport? Do they post about, keeping healthy? Like, this is all external to work. And if it is work focused, like, do they train themselves up regularly? Do they, I don't know, speak to multiple teams? Like, there's lots of touch points there. And that's kind of my first process. But look, it doesn't always happen that you can find this information from their LinkedIn. Like, some people don't even use LinkedIn. So then, of course, I'll go to the company, look at their insights, look at their growth. Is there any brand new features, functionalities that I can comment on, identify? Have they just had a summer party? Always think that's a nice touch point to kind of open up and find out, what's been going on in their world. And then, then there is the gap in that as well. So I go to I go into Google. I'll obviously look at their website via Google, but I'll also maybe type in their name on Google. There's so much information that is out there. Of course, that's kind of my last stretch, but any bit that I can bring into the conversation that will allow me 1 to 2 minutes to identify maybe a small nugget of interest that match is going to change the sales process fundamentally.
Amazing.
So it's latching, but positively on the more personal connection. And how do you do that throughout? Because it's obviously it happens with one individual, but then you may have to go and convince someone, maybe from an IT team, maybe someone with maybe a less flashy, profile who's not necessarily on social networks. Like, how do you go and deal with them, the different personas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, that's something that falls onto the knowledge of the persona. I get when I started at Jiminny, obviously I came into some of those calls not knowing what did the IT manager do? What was his fundamental role in the SaaS industry? I had to really learn on the go. Of course, the benefits were I could listen back to these conversations that previous team members had done. But when I was actually learning, I was looking at Google, what does their day-to-day look like? And that's where that value position comes in. So whether or not I find some small nugget of interest between us both, if I know where to position the product that I'm selling to them and show them how we're actually going to fundamentally change their world, then that's going to really help me within the sales process. So of course, there are CFOs, for example, that I had to learn brand new areas of selling to that. They very much want to stick to the logistics, what's the cost, what's the price. Occasionally you get a chatty one, it's really exciting, but it's really understanding what person you're speaking to, breaking the ice where you can, but focusing on what's going to change their world and making it as relevant as possible.
Yeah. And what persona do you think, or what roles do you think are becoming involved now within the buying cycle? You touched on earlier, there's more people involved in the process now as well. So what are the roles that you're experiencing within the process now versus maybe 12 months ago or 18 months ago?
Yeah, I think I think CFO has kind of always been there, but we are seeing, occasionally, and even when we have very small opportunities, they're now coming into them. Sometimes you'd get, a sign off from a manager, for example, and, it'd be very smooth sailing. For those kind of larger scale deals, when you're kind of, from our extent, looking at the mid-market section and maybe even, looking towards enterprise, you're also sometimes looking at stakeholders that might not even be able be using the product in their day-to-day, but they want insight in terms of, is there a future with this platform for my team? Or do I see this being relevant to kind of bring in an outsider's perspective? So it's we used to primarily just deal with sales managers, enablement, for example, revenue operations. And now the scope is kind of customer success directors might come in because they want to get their eyes on the tool. CEOs sometimes have fundamental sign-off when we used to have sign-off from managers and directors. So that just means another meeting, another persona you got to learn about, another bit of research. But like I said, it's so worth it with, changing close rates, changing win rates. You got to really put in the effort and the grind to get to the goal, I think.
And the world of just to change topic a little bit, the startup world is very turbulent. So both on the buying and the selling side, and there's an argument that the people with the longest tenure tend to be consistently overachievers. Have you got any recommendations for people within a tech startup to stay longer within that same company and to manage expectations with leadership or to communicate better with their peers?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you touched on changing working environment, but also working in a startup, there's a lot going on in the world of startups at the moment and tech as a whole. And I think relationships between you know, your leaders and how you kind of position that. And it does obviously depend on the culture and that kind of openness and transparency. But recently we've been doing something at Jiminny, which has been like a real game changer, where we're like meeting once a week with our leadership team to actually have what we call like a lunchtime learning session. And it's for them, you know, Shelley, like you touched on, she kind of jumps in and gives us all of this insight in terms of, you know, how do I actually develop? Like I touched on, Shelley is very good at like giving you the ideas of how you can get to, you know, potentially her world or you know, where she was, you know, in the previous role. And there are like two really big topics that have stuck with me ever since that conversation. The first one is actually, I'll start with the second one because I think it leads into the first one quite nicely. The second one was really around the story you tell yourself. So you're brand new to the business, or you're like me and you're a year and a half in, and don't worry, this has literally happened to me the other day, where leadership comes up to you and makes a small change, for example, maybe in your role or the team and what they're going to be focusing on, right? And suddenly you kind of sit there and you go, right, so is there a reason behind this? Like there's a changing world around us. It's not the nicest to see from other companies, you know, points of view. Like, am I now in a position where it could be quite risky? And it's very easy to tell yourself a story that, you know, in a couple of weeks' time, I may not be here, and just increasing like what is, you know, you don't need the stress and anxiety of something you don't know because you haven't got clarification of what the actual reason is, right? Like truly transparency. Like I had the exact same thing. I was sitting there, and look, Jiminny is a very open environment and I wasn't being open. I was being this closed person, but I know that everyone can do it, and you can close off and you're like, well, I'm just going to focus on the job at hand and hopefully I'll be here in a couple of weeks. However, luckily then I fully opened myself up to the team, because it kind of got to a point where I was like, oh, no, I don't feel like I'm doing that much wrong. Like I've got to confront someone about this. So I spoke to leadership, and then the next thing you know, I found out that the reason why they were sort of moving the teams around slightly was because people were positioned in the role better than others. So it's really for the fundamental benefits of the team to hit the target rather than us being in a position where we're in trouble. And the actual like nip it in the bud is my second point, or the first point is speak to your leaders as soon as you can, whenever you've got an issue, as long as you've got that culture and openness, the game will change and they'll tell you exactly why. And hopefully it'll be positive.
Yeah, I told you got the best leadership in the game, right? Having the possibility to even, you know, expose your concerns to leadership is, I think, is very rare. And a lot of companies are trying to pretend they've got this culture in place where, hey, you know, we've got an open door policy here. So the CEO works in the office, and actually you want to go to the CEO and you need to go through 6 PAs, and the meeting is in 6 months time. So you just don't have that to start with. So now, well done, and well done to actually putting yourself out as well, because it is quite scary, and you might, you know, find something out that you actually don't want to. Awesome. Is there any advice on how to phrase that to start with when you have to bring up a concern?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is exactly why this lunch club was good, because we did role plays as well, right? Because it's not an easy conversation, and trust me, loads of people in our team got it not wrong, but you can't get it wrong, but like they positioned it because we had to act as leaders the completely wrong way. I think it's making sure that you clarify exactly what the issue is. I think it's so easy to beat around the bush with these conversations. Like you don't actually get to the root of where it's coming from. Let's, for example, say I was a bit worried I didn't hit target, for example, last month. You kind of go, oh, like I didn't create enough opportunity last month. Like I think I can really get there this month. And you kind of just want to focus in on like, I didn't hit my target. Slightly worried about like our meeting that's upcoming. Like, could you just please tell me what this is centered around? They'll be very transparent, hopefully, and be like, look, it isn't centered around that. I wanted to catch up about this opportunity. Like that's just one example where like a meeting that seems like it could be trouble is actually just a conversation you're having with your leader. I think it's just to be, it's kind of just to address the issue. I think that's my fundamental, like what we covered in those meetings was address it and address it clearly. Don't kind of be a bit clouded by what you kind of provide information on, basically.
Yeah. And you speak a lot about culture and, you know, how you've got a great culture over there, which is amazing. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of some great cultures as well. Also unfortunate to have been part of ones that are not so great also. What do you think goes into fostering an environment which creates a culture like this? Like what's important to you, what you experiencing over there?
Yeah, I think always we're quite good where we are in terms of when anyone we stick to like our 7 values. And when anyone does something of those values, it gets put on something called we use the loop. So you mean the loop? Have you heard of it?
No, what's the 7 values?
Oh God, you've asked me on the spot.
This is this is a harsh question.
Should have done that. Let's move on.
Yeah, we'll move on because on the spot, I don't know if I'll get there, but I'll be able to rattle them off in about 5. But like the benefit is you then get like this pop-up on Slack that says like, oh, Freddie's been open and this is what happened in the, in the process, or be trustworthy. Like there's so many. Don't use be trustworthy because I don't think that is one. This is what I mean, on the spot, I'm not ready for it.
That's my fault. I shouldn't have asked that.
But it is that visibility piece, like actually seeing, not only it coming from leadership when they tell you in one-to-ones, but sharing, whenever the values are felt and heard, from their teams. And even if it's from rep to rep, it's like that openness. I also think, it's having a leadership does help where they've gone through the processes. I personally feel, because I've done the previous companies, like sometimes they're lucky to be in that role, or sometimes you feel like, they've kind of been handed you and they don't really want to build a relationship. You're just another number. I think with the leadership that we have is very lucky, is because they felt it from the ground up. They really do feel like there's like an element of like a colleague nature. Like we have like a WhatsApp group, which we talk on, external to work. Like having that really like open communication, I think is so essential with leadership personally. I mean, I'm very lucky to have it, and I know that some businesses don't, but I think that does help build a culture where you can feel, comfortable to speak about anything, whether it's work or personal.
Do you think that's the biggest factor for you, is the openness of leadership and the ability to be able to communicate with them?
100%. I think it just releases that, like I said, like you can build up in the sales world specifically, like stress and anxiety are like always, one of those things that kind of sits in the background and it can creep up on you quite quickly. And having open communication and really feeling like, they're not just there for the number. Of course, it's really important, but that they're also in some elements as being like your friend. Like if they feel like you're under stress, you need time off, like it's very easy to take, time off work. Like it's not something they're going to jump on meetings while you're away. They're going to help you out. So I love that kind of, it does suit me. I mean, it's obviously some it doesn't, but it really does suit me personally, because it's kind of the opposite of what I've had in the past. And that kind of shows how great Jiminny is for me, basically.
Yeah. And there's obviously the relationship with leadership, but there's, I'm sure, a lot going on between yourselves as well as colleagues. Like we speak to Becky, we speak to Nick, and it feels like there's real camaraderie between you within the team. Like, how do you nurture these relationships internally?
Yeah, I like we're very good. Like if you just stick on like the kind of work focus primarily, like to start off with, it's like we always try and make sure we're in the office together whenever we go in. Obviously, if you are remote working, like always having a meeting in the morning, even if it's not relevant that much to work or KPIs or whatever you want to spend the time on, like you do have a very basic scope of what you want to cover. But like that sometimes leads to, like this morning, for example, like it was a very fluid conversation. Like we caught up very briefly, but then it was like a nice conversation. And that constant, again, it's like communication with your team builds relationships. Again, like the WhatsApp group, which is external to leadership. Don't tell Tom, but he's not on it. But it's like groups like that. It's like groups like that, which builds like that camaraderie. Like you said, like you can text each other, be like, look, I'm like going to be 5 minutes late. Can you just jump on the call slightly earlier and just start speaking to the client, for example? And then like if you take it outside the work focus, is like trying to get organized, an occasional social, for example, just like whether it's going for drinks, doing something fun, learning more about the interests of those you work with. Like I think that's such a key piece as well. That sometimes doesn't get the focus, and actually being like a little bit team focused too, rather than the whole company coming together. You go out for like a lunch, you go out for nice drinks. I think that's really important.
Yeah, there's a strength around, I love going to the pub. The pub culture, if it's done right, I think it's very powerful for building relationships within the team outside of management, and they can do whatever they want, have their own little secrets, what happened in the weekend or after work days. can be within a specific, secret WhatsApp group, but I think it's very, very important.
To be clear, the Revenue Revolution podcast doesn't encourage people to go to the pub if you don't want to. There are other ways of harboring good relationships with your colleagues as well outside of that. But just staying on that theme a little bit longer, Freddie. I've been in instances where, as a manager with somebody a team reporting into me, sometimes it's difficult to separate the two, right? So I've had instances where I've had really good relationships with my team, and we've gone out together, we drink, we eat, we do, have lots of fun. But then there's instances where, the next day at work, maybe that professionalism isn't there. And they often, he's laughing because he knows what I'm talking about. It's almost not there, and it's almost like, hey, we're still in the pub, but we're not. How do you guys balance that?
Yeah, but I mean, I think like it does like, you've got to make sure, again, this is kind of like hiring the right people for the role, I think, in some ways, or the culture fit. I think personally, like, I haven't really experienced it at Jiminny myself, but there have been instances in my previous companies where I've worked where someone comes in, they're still talking about the night before, they're kind of lackadaisical and being like, oh, I can't be bothered to work today. I was feeling it from last night, XYZ, whatever the excuse is. And I just think that comes down to that is kind of centered around the values. Like, you need to make sure that you come into work, just from my personal opinion, you come into work from day one and you have the focused mindset to get the job done, no matter what. Hopefully, no matter what state. I don't mean you're going to be like up tonight, but like, no matter how you feel, like, you're there to work and get the job done. And so is everyone else. Like, I think it's having that mutual respect for everyone. I think respect is huge. Like, you've all gone out for drinks, you're all having a bit of fun, but the respect is you've all come in the next day and you're there to work as a team. And then that's just like mutual responsibility. Like, you've got to just make sure you're responsible for what you do. And that's sharing, the pains of the team, but also, working together so you can do that again. You don't want to be losing that. So it's important to keep the focus.
Yeah, absolutely.
And last question before the final question. So you moved from a different sector into tech, a different role, obviously different processes, and what I think is you're a very successful person. Like, you know how to build a relationship, you know how to sell. What was how did you get started? Like, how did you make sure that you had a successful ramp up? You learned as quickly as possible. Obviously, Jiminny helps with this, but from a mindset viewpoint, how do you set yourself up for success?
Yeah, I think it's very much, I really did focus on that knowledge is power piece, if I'm truly honest. Like, I really did think, if I can come into Jiminny and within the first 2 weeks, 4 weeks, I mean, it's quite a big platform, so 4 weeks probably, if I could learn as much as I could about the platform and about what we did and how we helped, the value proposition, then over time I'd get better at the sales process. Like, it was something that I knew I'd get better at. I could work on that, and I'd be surrounded by other people who could do the sales process probably better than I could. But if I could learn the product inside out and know where each role sits within the business inside out, then I was going to almost be, I would then be level par with everyone in the sales team. Like, I would be on the same level, and that is exactly where I'd sit. And then I could get better at the sales process. So I think for me, if you're going into a new role, or you're about to join a business as a brand new sort of SDR, for example, like, the key and fundamental thing for me is like, knowledge is power. And then you can actually develop areas of, the process that you work in, customer success, sales, enablement, because you've got all of that, that background to really push forward to any customer that comes with you, comes with a question to you.
Yeah.
That's very logical as well. It makes a lot of sense. So as Mick said, that was the penultimate question, and the final question.
There you go. You had to give his vocabulary out.
Yeah, it's always the same question. What is your favorite memory in your career so far?
Oh, it's a good question. My favorite memory so far is when we all went as a team for Jiminny this year for our annual sort of summit in Bulgaria.
Nice.
because like, first of all, like taking it from a personal perspective, like I'm a massive traveler. Like I love going to new places. Like it's a huge part of my life. It makes me happy. And going to Bulgaria was something that I never pitched myself doing, not in the, just in the short term, like maybe something that happened in the long term. And it got me to visit a brand new place. But also I think it was so great because again, this is something that I love as the startup environment was I got to meet everyone that I'd spoken to, like actually face to face in a very relaxed environment. And it was just really fun. It brought together so much information about what we were going to do in the future, like what was up and coming for Jiminny, but also like lots of games, lots of excitement, like surrounding, like building that team bonding. And I think that that's stuck with me the most over my career is how important it is to have, like I said, that communication and openness throughout the whole team. That's what builds retention. That's what keeps you in a company.
Amazing. What a way to wrap up. Thank you, Freddie. Really appreciate it. So this has been the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Joint Flows. Until next time, thank you very much, Freddie.
Cheers.
Thanks, Freddie. Bye.